Imagine if someone revealed to you that long before a certain man drew his very first breath, the Almighty had proclaimed he would triumph over his elder, more powerful sibling. That a simple serving of lentil soup would alter the fate of entire peoples. That someone known for trickery would go on to father the people chosen by God. This is the account of Jacob, a man whose entrance into the world itself carried prophetic weight, whose given name meant one who supplants, and whose journey was defined by supernatural meetings that challenge all understanding. He took blessings that belonged to another. Still, God chose to work through him. He fled into banishment to save his life, yet witnessed the gates of paradise revealed above him in desolate wilderness. He labored 14 years in pursuit of love, found himself on the receiving end of the same deceptive methods he had once employed, and raised a household that would grow into 12 distinct tribes. But the most stunning chapter arrived during a dark evening beside a flowing river, when Jacob, isolated, filled with terror, and utterly desperate, seized hold of an unknown figure and would not release his grip until he obtained a blessing. During that encounter, he engaged in physical combat with the Creator himself until daybreak, and from that moment forward, neither the celestial realm nor the earthly world would ever perceive him in the same manner again. When the sun finally rose, the man known for deception carried a new name, a transformed identity, and a lasting injury to his leg that would forever testify that certain meetings with the divine alter you permanently. This is the narrative of his life. Long before Jacob's eyes ever opened to behold creation, the Almighty had already made declarations concerning his existence. His mother, Rebekah, carried a child within her, yet something unusual was taking place inside her body. The unborn infants in her womb were pressing against one another, fighting so intensely that she questioned what could be happening. This situation was far from ordinary. Therefore, Rebekah chose the wise course of action when confused. She went to inquire of the Lord. The response from God was absolutely remarkable. He revealed to her something that would resonate throughout the entirety of human history, as the text records in Genesis chapter 25, verse 23. The Lord spoke to her directly, saying, "Two nations exist within your womb, and two distinct peoples shall emerge separated from your body, and one people shall possess greater strength than the other people, and the elder child shall be in service to the younger one." Consider that statement for a brief moment. The Almighty was not simply discussing two infant boys. He was speaking of two complete nations that would spring forth from these offspring. And here lies the astounding element. The older child, who according to every tradition and legal standard should assume the position of authority, would ultimately find himself serving the younger sibling. This contradicted absolutely everything people understood during that era. The son born first was entitled to receive the largest portion of wealth, the position of family authority, absolutely everything. Yet the Almighty declared it would be reversed. The second-born son would be the one who held primary importance. Rebekah held this prophetic word within her heart. She understood her sons were designated for something remarkable even before they experienced their first moment of breathing. When the moment arrived for Rebekah to deliver her children, the prophecy started to manifest in the most peculiar fashion. Genesis chapter 25, verses 24 through 26, provides the account of what transpired. When the time came for her to give birth was completed, look and see, there existed twins within her womb. The first infant emerged appearing red throughout like a garment made of hair. They gave him the name Esau. Following after that arrival came his sibling, and his hand had grasped hold of Esau's heel. He received the name Jacob. Isaac had reached 60 years of age when she brought them into the world. The initial baby arrived covered in red-colored hair, so abundant in hair that his appearance suggested he wore a coat of fur. They called this child Esau. But the story becomes fascinating here. The second infant refused to simply arrive quietly into the world. Jacob came forth while gripping onto the heel of his brother, as though he was attempting to pull Esau backward and emerge as the firstborn himself. From the absolute first instant of existence, Jacob was struggling for that primary position. His parents chose the name Jacob for him, which carries the meaning of one who grabs the heel or one who takes hold of the heel. Yet the name possessed an additional, deeper significance as well. It could simultaneously mean one who supplants, someone who assumes another individual's rightful place. That particular name would demonstrate itself prophetic in ways nobody could yet envision. Isaac had lived 60 years when these sons entered the world. Right from the beginning, everyone could observe these boys were destined to be vastly different from one another. As the years passed and Jacob and Esau matured, they developed into completely contrasting types of individuals. Genesis chapter 25, verses 27 through 28, demonstrates how different these brothers were. The boys continued to grow. Esau became a skilled hunter, a man who belonged to the open fields. Jacob was a simple man who dwelt among the tents. Isaac developed love for Esau on account of the fact that he consumed his wild game. But Rebekah held love for Jacob. Esau found his passion in the wilderness. He transformed into a masterful hunter, constantly roaming in untamed places, pursuing animals existing roughly in nature, returning home with fresh meat. He was most likely muscular, sun-darkened, filled with adventure, precisely the type of son who brought pride to his father through his manly abilities. Isaac cherished Esau, and the scriptures speak honestly regarding the reason why, because Esau provided him with delicious venison from wild animals to consume. There existed something about that flavorful wild meat that caused Isaac to show preference toward his son born first. Jacob possessed different characteristics. He was a contemplative man who remained close to the tent dwellings. He was not out pursuing beasts through the wilderness regions. He demonstrated more thoughtfulness, more comfort with domestic settings, more deliberate in his approach to things. The scripture describes him as a plain man, which indicates he was straightforward, sincere in his demeanor, someone who showed preference for the security and ease of home environment. While Isaac showed favoritism toward Esau, Rebekah held affection for Jacob. Perhaps she kept in remembrance the prophecy from God. Perhaps she perceived something unique within this younger son of hers. Or perhaps Jacob simply devoted more time in her presence, and they possessed mutual understanding more naturally. Whatever the underlying cause, the household stood divided. The father loved one particular son, the mother loved the other one. This type of parental favoritism would result in grave difficulties. During one unremarkable day, an event occurred that would transform the complete future of both these siblings. Jacob found himself at home, preparing a pot of lentil soup. The aroma must have been absolutely delightful, full-bodied, earthy in quality, savory in nature. Meanwhile, Esau had spent time out in the open fields, most likely hunting throughout the entire day, and he returned home thoroughly exhausted and desperately hungry. Genesis chapter 25, verses 29 through 30, preserves the precise moment. Jacob was cooking stew, and Esau arrived from the field, and he was extremely faint. Esau spoke to Jacob, saying, "Feed me, I earnestly request of you, with that same red-colored stew, for I am completely faint." As a result of this, his name became associated with Edom. Esau had reached such a state of hunger and physical fatigue that he could scarcely form coherent thoughts. He observed that reddish stew and his stomach assumed control over his mental faculties. He did not even refer to it by its accurate name. He simply gestured and said in essence, "Give me a portion of that red substance." He became so fixated on that crimson-colored soup that it transformed into an additional name for him, Edom, which translates to mean red. However, Jacob perceived something significant in this particular moment. He recognized an opportunity presenting itself. What he articulated next was deliberate and absolutely shocking. Genesis chapter 25, verse 31 records the words, Jacob stated, "Sell to me on this very day your birthright," the birthright itself. This was not merely about being the son born eldest. The birthright signified you obtained a double share of the inheritance from your father. It signified you assumed the role of head over the family when your father passed from this life. It signified you continued the family lineage and received the unique blessing. In their specific case, it signified inheriting the covenant promises the Almighty had established with their grandfather Abraham and their father Isaac. Jacob desired it intensely, and he stood willing to exchange a bowl of soup in trade for it. Now, any person possessing reasonable judgment would have responded with laughter at such a proposition. A serving of stew in exchange for your complete inheritance, for your standing as family leader, for the promises spoken by God. It was completely absurd. Yet Esau did not respond with laughter. He did not even pause to consider. Genesis chapter 25, verses 32 through 34, reveals Esau's answer to us. Esau declared, "Look at me. I am at the very point of dying, and what benefit shall this birthright provide to me?" Jacob responded, "Swear an oath to me this very day." And Esau swore the oath to him. He sold his birthright directly to Jacob. Following this, Jacob provided Esau with bread and lentil stew. He consumed the food and drank, then rose to his feet and departed on his way. In this manner, Esau demonstrated contempt for his birthright. Esau's line of reasoning was both dramatic and extremely foolish. "I am on the verge of death anyway," he asserted. He was not genuinely dying. He simply felt very hungry. However, in his thinking, his immediate bodily requirement held more importance than any blessing in the future. What value does an inheritance possess if you perish from starvation today? That represented how he viewed the situation. Jacob caused him to swear a binding oath. This was not some casual transaction. An oath carried binding force, serious weight, sacred significance. Esau swore the oath. He made the promise. He relinquished his birthright in official terms. Following this, he ate the stew, drank some water, stood up, and walked away. Just in that simple manner, he satisfied his appetite and departed as though nothing of importance had taken place. The biblical text's closing remark proves devastating. In this way, Esau treated his birthright with contempt. He regarded it as though it possessed no worth whatsoever. He maintained no respect for the spiritual meaning of what he had just surrendered. He existed for the immediate moment, for his bodily desires, for whatever felt pleasurable right at that instant. The time to come held no significance to him. The promises spoken by the Almighty held no significance to him. Only the present moment carried weight. This was not Jacob manipulating him through trickery or applying force. Esau executed his choice with clear vision and with a full stomach afterward. That particular choice revealed everything concerning his character. Years continued to pass. Isaac advanced in age, and his physical body started to decline. Genesis chapter 27, verses 1 through 4, establishes what took place next. It came to pass that when Isaac had grown old and his eyesight had become dim to the point that he could not see, he summoned Esau, his eldest son, and spoke to him, saying, "My son." And Esau said to him, "Behold, here I am present." Isaac said, "Behold, at this time I am old. I do not know the day when my death will occur. Now, therefore, please take, I request of you, your weapons, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field, and hunt some wild game for me, and prepare for me savory meat, the kind that I love, and bring it to me, so that I may eat it, that my soul may pronounce blessing upon you before I die." Isaac's vision had failed completely. His eyes had grown far too dim to function. He understood death was drawing near, and he desired to pronounce his blessing upon Esau before he departed from life. This blessing carried tremendous power. When a father spoke words of blessing over his son, it was not simply pleasant speech. It possessed spiritual authority and prophetic significance. It would establish the son's future path. Isaac instructed Esau to go hunting, kill some animal from the wild, prepare it in the manner Isaac loved it prepared, and return with it. Then Isaac would consume it and pronounce the blessing upon Esau. Isaac maintained his love for that flavorful meat even in his advanced years. He stood determined to bless Esau, the son he favored, without regard for what had transpired with the birthright years in the past. However, someone was present and listening. Genesis chapter 27 verse 5 states, Rebekah heard when Isaac spoke these words to Esau, his son. Rebekah overheard the entire conversation, and she kept in remembrance the prophecy from God. The younger child would exercise rule over the older one. She remembered that Jacob, not Esau, was designated to receive the primary blessing. Whether Isaac had allowed the word from God to slip from memory or was choosing to disregard it deliberately, Rebekah made the decision she needed to take action. She rapidly located Jacob and informed him of what was transpiring. Genesis chapter 27, verses 6 through 10, preserves her urgent directives. Rebekah spoke to Jacob her son, stating, Behold, I overheard your father speaking to Esau your brother, saying, Bring me wild game, and prepare savory meat for me, that I may consume it, and bless you before the Lord prior to my death. Now therefore, my son, give obedience to my voice in accordance with that which I command you. Go at this moment to the flock, and bring to me from that place 2 choice young goats, and I will prepare them as savory meat for your father, the kind that he loves, and you shall bring it to your father, so that he may eat it, and so that he may bless you prior to his death. Rebekah possessed a plan worked out. Instead of meat from wild animals, they would utilize goats from their own flock. She would cook them in the exact manner Isaac preferred, and Jacob would deliver the food to his father and obtain the blessing instead of Esau. The plan was audacious. It involved deception. Yet Rebekah held the belief it was essential to bring about fulfillment of the plan from God. Jacob was not entirely at ease with this scheme. He identified an evident problem that could destroy everything. Genesis chapter 27, verses 11 through 12, demonstrates his apprehension. Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, Behold, Esau my brother is a man covered with hair, and I am a man with smooth skin. Perhaps my father will touch me, and I shall appear to him as one who deceives, and I shall bring upon myself a curse, and not receive a blessing. Jacob understood his father could not see visually, but Isaac could certainly use the sense of touch. Esau possessed body hair, thick and coarse in texture. Jacob's skin was smooth. If Isaac placed his hands on him and felt smooth skin instead of Esau's hairy covering, the deception would be exposed immediately. Instead of obtaining a blessing, Jacob would bring down a curse upon himself. He would stand revealed as one who lies and acts fraudulently. However, Rebekah maintained her determination. Genesis chapter 27, verse 13, records her remarkable answer. His mother said to him, Upon me be your curse, my son. Simply give obedience to my voice, and go bring them to me. She stood willing to accept the curse upon herself. She believed with such intensity that this was the right course that she would embrace any negative consequences. She instructed Jacob to simply obey her command and obtain the goats. Therefore, Jacob complied, and Rebekah commenced her work. Genesis chapter 27, verses 14 through 17, informs us, He went and brought them and delivered them to his mother. His mother prepared savory meat of the kind his father loved. Rebekah took the finest garments of her eldest son, Esau, which were kept with her in the house, and placed them upon Jacob, her younger son. She positioned the skins of the young goats upon his hands and upon the smooth part of his neck, and she handed the savory meat and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. Rebekah approached this with thoroughness. She cooked the meat to perfection, causing it to taste like game from the wild. She took Esau's best clothing, which apparently she kept stored in the house, and dressed Jacob in them. In this way, he would carry the scent of Esau, who devoted his time to outdoor activities. Then came the ingenious detail. She took the skins from the young goats and wrapped them around Jacob's hands and neck. At this point, if Isaac reached out to touch him, he would feel something possessing hair, similar to Esau's skin. Jacob underwent transformation. He maintained the appearance of himself, yet he carried the smell of Esau and felt to the touch like Esau. The disguise stood complete. Jacob entered his father's tent bearing the meal, his heart most likely beating rapidly. Genesis chapter 27, verses 18 through 19, captures the moment. He came to his father and said, "My father." Isaac said, "Here I am present." "Who are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done in accordance with what you instructed me. Please arise, sit upright, and eat from my wild game, so that your soul may bless me." The lie emerged directly. "I am Esau, your firstborn." Jacob claimed to be his sibling. He stated he had accomplished everything Isaac requested. He told his blind father to sit upright and consume the food so he could pronounce the blessing. However, Isaac experienced immediate suspicion. Something felt incorrect. Genesis chapter 27, verse 20, shows Isaac's doubt. Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have located it so rapidly, my son?" And Jacob said, "Because the Lord your God caused it to come to me." Isaac could not accept the notion that Esau had hunted and prepared the meal with such speed. It should have required many hours. Jacob had an answer prepared in advance. God provided assistance in finding it quickly. He even brought the name of God into his act of deception, which rendered the lie even more serious. Isaac still remained unconvinced. Genesis chapter 27, verses 21 through 23, informs us what transpired next. Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near, I request of you, so that I may touch you, my son, to determine whether you truly are my very son, Esau, or not." Jacob moved near to Isaac, his father. Isaac touched him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. Therefore he blessed him. This was the decisive test. Isaac instructed Jacob to approach closely. He extended his hand and made contact with him. His confusion proves almost painful to read in the text. The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. Isaac heard one son, yet felt another through touch. His senses were providing him with information that contradicted each other. Yet the hairy goat skins accomplished their purpose. Isaac's sense of touch overpowered his sense of hearing. He persuaded himself, this must be Esau. Therefore he decided to pronounce the blessing. However, even at that point, Isaac asked one additional time to be absolutely certain. Genesis chapter 27, verse 24 states, "And he said, 'Are you truly my very son, Esau?' And Jacob said, 'I am.' Jacob spoke the lie again directly to the face of his father. "I am," two words that sealed the deception in place. Isaac told him to bring the food near. Genesis chapter 27, verses 25 through 27, continues the account. He said, "Bring it near to me, and I will eat from my son's wild game, so that my soul may bless you." Jacob brought it near to him. Isaac did eat, and Jacob brought him wine, and he drank it. His father Isaac said to him, "Come near at this time, and kiss me, my son." Jacob came near and kissed him, and Isaac smelled the smell of his garments, and blessed him. Isaac consumed the meal. He drank the wine. Following this, he asked Jacob to approach and kiss him. When Jacob leaned close, Isaac detected the scent of Esau's garments on him, the smell of the outdoors, of the open fields. That particular smell convinced Isaac completely. This had to be Esau without question. Therefore Isaac pronounced the blessing. Genesis chapter 27, verses 27 through 29, records these words carrying power. Isaac said, "Observe, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore may God give to you from the dew of heaven, and from the fatness of the earth, and abundance of grain and wine. May people serve you, and nations bow themselves down to you. Be lord and master over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be the one who blesses you." The blessing encompassed everything. Isaac blessed Jacob with abundance, dew from the heavens, fertile soil, plentiful grain and wine. He blessed him with position of authority. People would be in service to him. Nations would bow themselves down to him. He stated specifically, "Be lord and master over your brothers. Exercise rule over your siblings." Then came the ultimate blessing. "Cursed be anyone who places a curse upon you. Blessed be anyone who pronounces blessing upon you." This was the identical blessing the Almighty had pronounced upon Abraham. The blessing stood complete. It was spoken forth. In that particular culture, once a father's blessing was pronounced, it could not be reversed or withdrawn. Jacob had successfully deceived his father and stolen the blessing belonging to his brother. Jacob had barely departed his father's tent when everything collapsed. Genesis chapter 27, verse 30, informs us of the timing. It came to pass, as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob was yet scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau, his brother, came in from his hunting. Esau entered with the genuine wild game, ready to obtain his blessing. He possessed no awareness whatsoever of what had just taken place. Genesis chapter 27, verses 31 through 33, shows us the terrible discovery. He also had prepared savory meat and brought it to his father, and said to his father, "Let my father arise and eat from his son's wild game, so that your soul may bless me." Isaac his father said to him, "Who are you?" Esau said, "I am your son, your firstborn, Esau." Isaac trembled very exceedingly and said, "Who then? Where is the one who has hunted wild game and brought it to me? And I have eaten from all of it before you came, and have blessed him. Yes, indeed, and he shall remain blessed." Isaac began to shake violently when realization dawned of what had occurred. Someone had come before Esau arrived. Someone had delivered food and obtained the blessing. That blessing could not be reversed or undone. When Isaac declared, "Yes, indeed, and he shall remain blessed," he was confirming that whoever obtained the blessing would retain it. It stood as final. Esau understood immediately. Genesis chapter 27, verse 34, captures his deep anguish. When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with a great and exceedingly bitter cry, and said to him, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." His cry was profound and bitter in quality. He begged his father to bless him as well. Genesis chapter 27, verses 35 through 36, continues the account. Isaac said, "Your brother came with trickery, and has taken away your blessing." Esau said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, at this moment he has taken away my blessing." He said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" Esau connected the events together. Jacob had claimed the birthright years in the past, and at this moment he had claimed the blessing as well. The name Jacob, meaning one who supplants, had proven itself accurate twice over. Esau asked with desperation if there remained any blessing left for him. Isaac could only offer a lesser blessing. Genesis chapter 27, verses 39 through 40, records it. Isaac his father answered and said to him, "Behold, your dwelling shall be from the fatness of the earth, and from the dew of heaven from above. By your sword shall you live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass, when you shall have the dominion, that you shall break his yoke from off your neck." Esau would exist by his sword and be in service to his brother. The prophecy from before their birth was at this point locked firmly in place through the blessing spoken by Isaac. However, Esau's grief transformed into something more sinister. Genesis chapter 27, verse 41, reveals his thoughts. Esau hated Jacob on account of the blessing with which his father blessed him. Esau said in his heart, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." Esau made the decision to end Jacob's life. He was simply waiting for their father to pass from this world, first out of honor and respect for Isaac, but following that, he would commit murder against his brother. The hatred burned intensely within his heart, and he planned the exact moment of vengeance. Somehow, Rebekah discovered information about Esau's plan. Genesis chapter 27, verses 42 through 45, shows her urgent answer. These words of Esau, her elder son, were reported to Rebekah. She sent and summoned Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, "Behold, your brother Esau concerning you comforts himself by purposing to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, and arise, flee immediately to Laban my brother, to Haran, and stay with him for a period of a few days, until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets that which you have done to him. Then I will send word and bring you back from that place. Why should I be deprived also of you both in a single day?" Rebekah instructed Jacob to run away. She dispatched him to her brother Laban in Haran, a distant location. She thought it would only be for a brief period of time, just until Esau's anger cooled in temperature. She held the belief Esau would, in time, forget what Jacob had accomplished. She possessed no awareness Jacob would remain absent for 20 years. She would never lay eyes on her beloved son again. Rebekah also persuaded Isaac to send Jacob away in official terms, using a different stated reason. Genesis chapter 27, verse 46, through chapter 28, verse 2, informs us. Rebekah said to Isaac, "I am weary of my life on account of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife from the daughters of Heth, such as these which are from the daughters of the land, what benefit shall my life provide to me?" Isaac summoned Jacob and blessed him and gave him charge and said to him, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Paddan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take for yourself a wife from that place from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother." Isaac agreed with Rebekah's expressed concern. He did not desire Jacob entering into marriage with local Canaanite women in the same manner Esau had done. Therefore, he officially sent Jacob to locate a wife among their own relatives in Haran. Jacob departed, running to preserve his life, carrying nothing except the clothes on his back and the blessing from his father. He did not know when or whether he would ever come back home. Jacob journeyed alone, leaving behind everything familiar. He had become a fugitive at this point, fleeing from the murderous rage of his brother. As the sun started to descend one evening, he needed to locate a place for sleeping. Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 through 11, establishes the scene. Jacob went out from Beersheba and went in the direction of Haran. He came upon a certain place and stayed there through the night because the sun had set. He took some of the stones from that place and positioned them as his pillows and lay down in that place to sleep. Jacob possessed no tent, no comfortable bed, nothing whatsoever. He located some stones, utilized them as a pillow, and lay down in the open air beneath the stars. He was most likely exhausted, filled with fear, and uncertain regarding his future. He had obtained a blessing, yet lost his home, his family, and his security. Then something truly extraordinary took place while he slept. Genesis chapter 28, verses 12 through 15, describes the dream that would transform everything. He dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and the top portion of it reached all the way to heaven. Behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, "I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you are lying, to you will I give it, and to your seed, and your seed shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south, and in you and in your seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you in all places to which you go, and will bring you again into this land. For I will not leave you until I have accomplished that which I have spoken to you of." Jacob saw a ladder, or a stairway, making connection between earth and heaven. Angels were traveling up and down on it, moving between heaven and earth, and at the top stood the Lord in person. God spoke in direct manner to Jacob, identifying himself as the God of Abraham and Isaac. Then God made astounding promises to this runaway man known for deceit. God promised Jacob the very land on which he was sleeping would belong to him and his descendants. God promised his offspring would be as numberless as the dust particles of the earth, spreading in every direction. God promised that all families on earth would receive blessing through Jacob and his descendants. And most significantly for Jacob in that frightening moment, God promised to be present with him wherever his journey took him, to protect him and to bring him back to his home safely. This was the identical covenant God had established with Abraham and Isaac. At this moment, God was confirming it with Jacob. Despite everything Jacob had accomplished, the deception, the lies, God was choosing to work through his life. When Jacob awoke from sleep, he was completely overwhelmed. Genesis chapter 28, verses 16 through 17, captures his reaction. Jacob awoke out of his sleep, and he said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." He was afraid and said, "How awesome and fearful is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Jacob realized he had been sleeping on ground that was holy. The word dreadful in this context means inspiring awe or commanding fear. This place commanded profound respect and wonder. He called it the house of God and the gate of heaven. Genesis chapter 28, verses 18 through 19, shows what Jacob did in response. Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stone that he had positioned as his pillows and set it upright as a pillar and poured oil upon the top portion of it. He called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of that city was called Luz at the first. Jacob took the stone on which he had rested his head and stood it upright as a memorial pillar. He poured oil on top of it, consecrating it as a sacred marker. He renamed the place Bethel, which translates to mean house of God. Then Jacob made a vow to God. Genesis chapter 28, verses 20 through 22, records his promise. Jacob vowed a vow, stating, "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I travel, and will give me bread to eat and garments to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you shall give me, I will surely give the 10th portion unto you." Jacob made a vow with conditions attached. If God would be present with him, protect him, provide food and clothing, and bring him to his home safely, then the Lord would be his God. He promised to give back 1/10 of everything God provided to him. Jacob continued his journey with renewed hope. Jacob kept traveling in an eastward direction until he arrived at the land of the people from the east. Genesis chapter 29, verses 1 through 3, describes what he located. Then Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. He looked, and behold, a well in the field, and observe, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well they provided water for the flocks, and a great stone was positioned upon the well's mouth, and to that location were all the flocks gathered, and they rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the sheep, and returned the stone again upon the well's mouth in its proper place. Jacob came upon a well in an open field. 3 flocks of sheep were lying in close proximity to it, in a waiting state. There was a large stone providing covering for the mouth of the well. The local custom was that all the shepherds would assemble together with their flocks. Following that, they would work in combined effort to roll the heavy stone away from the well's opening. Jacob observed some shepherds present there and started asking questions. Genesis chapter 29, verses 4 through 6, informs us, Jacob said to them, "My brothers, from where do you come?" And they said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban the son of Nahor?" And they said, "We know him." He said to them, "Is he well?" They said, "He is well. Behold, Rachel his daughter comes with the sheep." Perfect timing indeed. Jacob asked where they originated from, and they said Haran, exactly where he needed to arrive. Then Jacob asked if they knew Laban. They did possess knowledge of him. Just as they were speaking together, Laban's daughter Rachel was approaching with her sheep. Then Rachel arrived, carrying her father's flock. Genesis chapter 29, verses 9 through 10, captures this significant moment. While he yet spoke with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she tended them. It came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. When Jacob saw Rachel, something took place inside him. Without waiting for the other shepherds, without waiting for assistance, Jacob went to the well by himself alone and rolled that heavy stone away. This stone usually required multiple men to move it, yet Jacob accomplished it alone. He watered the entire flock belonging to Laban. This was Jacob displaying strength, demonstrating his power to make an impression on this young woman. What transpired next was profoundly emotional. Genesis chapter 29, verses 11 through 12, informs us, Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. Jacob kissed Rachel, a customary greeting among family, and then broke into tears. After his long solitary journey, after fleeing from home, he had finally arrived at his destination. He had located his family. The emotion overwhelmed him completely. He explained who he was, and Rachel immediately ran to her home to inform her father. Laban's reaction was enthusiastic in nature. Genesis chapter 29, verses 13 through 14, states, "It came to pass, when Laban heard the report of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him, and embraced him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house." Jacob told Laban all these things. Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." Jacob stayed with him for the space of a month. Laban ran out to meet Jacob, embraced him, and brought him to his home. Jacob told Laban everything that had taken place. Laban acknowledged Jacob as family, and Jacob remained with him for a month. During that month, Jacob performed work for Laban. Then Laban brought up the matter of payment. Genesis chapter 29, verse 15, records it. Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my brother, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Laban did not desire Jacob working without payment just because they were relatives. He asked Jacob to name his wages. This seemed generous in appearance, but Laban was also a shrewd businessman. Jacob knew with exactness what he desired. Genesis chapter 29, verses 16 through 18, informs us. Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender in the eyes, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored, and Jacob loved Rachel and said, "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban had 2 daughters. The scripture describes Leah as tender-eyed, which could indicate her eyes were weak or gentle in quality, but the contrast with Rachel suggests she was not as attractive in appearance. Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob had fallen in love with Rachel, therefore Jacob made his offer. He would perform work for Laban for 7 years in exchange for permission to marry Rachel. This was an enormous bride price to pay, yet Jacob stood willing to pay it. Laban's response seemed agreeable in nature. Genesis chapter 29, verse 19 states, Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me." Laban said it was better to give Rachel to Jacob than to an outsider. However, take notice that Laban did not explicitly state, yes, you can marry Rachel after 7 years. He just said to remain. This vague language should have served as a warning. Genesis chapter 29, verse 20, shows us how Jacob felt about those 7 years. Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days on account of the love he had for her. 7 years, 2,555 days of difficult work. Yet because Jacob loved Rachel with such depth, those years flew by like days. Love caused the time to seem short. Jacob worked faithfully, counting down to the day he could finally marry the woman he loved. Finally, the 7 years were completed. Jacob had kept his portion of the bargain. Genesis chapter 29, verse 21, shows his request. Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in to her." Jacob's words were direct and legitimate in nature. He had worked 7 years. The time was completed. He desired his wife. He desired to consummate the marriage with Rachel. Laban agreed to hold the wedding. Genesis chapter 29, verses 22 through 23, informs us what transpired. Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. It came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to him, and Jacob went in to her. Laban threw a large wedding feast. Everyone from the area came to participate in celebration. There was most likely abundant food and wine. Then, in the evening, when it was dark, Laban brought the bride to Jacob's tent. But it was not Rachel. It was Leah. How did this event happen? In that culture, brides were heavily veiled during the wedding ceremony. Jacob could not see her face. It was dark. Jacob, trusting that Laban would keep his word, did not verify who was under the veil. He consummated the marriage with the woman he thought was Rachel. Genesis chapter 29, verse 24, adds a detail. Laban gave to his daughter Leah, Zilpah, his maid, as a handmaid. Laban even gave Leah a servant, Zilpah, as part of the marriage arrangement. Everything appeared legitimate and official in nature. However, when morning arrived, the deception was revealed. Genesis chapter 29, verse 25, captures Jacob's shock. It came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Imagine Jacob's reaction. He awoke, looked at his new wife in the morning light, and realized it was Leah, not Rachel. He immediately confronted Laban. "What have you done to me?" He had worked 7 years for Rachel. Why had Laban deceived him? The word Jacob used, beguiled, is significant. It's related to the same root as Jacob's own name. Jacob, the deceiver, the one who supplants, was at this moment the one being deceived. The man who had tricked his father was at this point experiencing what it felt like to be on the receiving end of trickery. Laban had an excuse prepared in advance. Genesis chapter 29, verse 26, records it. Laban said, "It must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn." Laban claimed it was against their custom to marry off the younger daughter before the older one. However, if this was true in reality, why had he not mentioned it 7 years ago when Jacob requested Rachel? Why did he permit Jacob to work all that time without clarifying this rule? The answer is evident. Laban was a manipulator. He had used Jacob's love for Rachel to obtain 14 years of labor instead of 7. Then Laban made another proposal. Genesis chapter 29, verse 27, informs us, "Fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also, for the service which you shall serve with me, yet 7 other years." Laban told Jacob to complete the bridal week with Leah, the 7 days of wedding celebration. Following that, he would give Rachel to Jacob as well, but it would cost another 7 years of work. Jacob was trapped. He had already consummated the marriage with Leah. In that culture, he could not undo it, and he still desperately desired Rachel. Therefore, he had no choice except to agree to Laban's terms. Jacob agreed to Laban's proposal. Genesis chapter 29, verses 28 through 30, informs us what took place. Jacob did so, and fulfilled her week. Laban gave him Rachel his daughter as wife also. Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah his handmaid, to be her maid. Jacob went in also to Rachel. He loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with Laban yet 7 other years. Jacob finished the week-long celebration with Leah. Following that, Laban gave him Rachel as his second wife. Laban also gave Rachel a servant named Bilhah. Jacob finally married the woman he loved and consummated that marriage as well. The scripture is honest about Jacob's feelings. He loved Rachel more than Leah. This was not fair to Leah, but it was the truth. Jacob had worked 7 years for Rachel, not Leah. His heart belonged to Rachel. At this point, Jacob had committed to another 7 years of labor. He would work a total of 14 years for Laban, all because he loved Rachel. That demonstrates dedication. That demonstrates perseverance. That demonstrates what love made Jacob willing to sacrifice. Jacob at this moment found himself in a complicated family situation. He had 2 wives, who were sisters, and they both lived in the same household. This arrangement would create tension, jealousy, and competition in the years ahead. God observed what was happening in Jacob's family. Genesis chapter 29 verse 31 informs us, "When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren." The word hated in this context means unloved or less loved. God saw that Leah was in a painful position, married to a man who did not love her the way he loved her sister. Therefore God showed compassion to Leah by allowing her to have children, while Rachel remained unable to conceive. Leah had her first son. Genesis chapter 29 verse 32 records the naming. Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, "Surely the Lord has looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me." She named him Reuben, which means see, a son. Leah hoped that giving Jacob a son would make him love her. She had 3 more sons in succession. Genesis chapter 29, verses 33 through 35, informs us, "She conceived again and bore a son, and said, 'Because the Lord has heard that I was hated, he has therefore given me this son also.' She called his name Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, 'Now this time will my husband be joined to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore was his name called Levi.' She conceived again and bore a son. She said, 'Now will I praise the Lord.' Therefore she called his name Judah and stopped bearing. She named them Simeon, Levi, and Judah. With Judah, whose name means praise, Leah finally stopped trying to earn Jacob's love through childbearing. Instead, she simply praised the Lord. Meanwhile, Rachel was desperate. Genesis chapter 30, verses 1 through 2, shows her anguish. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I die." Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel. He said, "Am I in God's place, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Rachel was jealous of Leah. She demanded children from Jacob. Jacob got angry. He could not give her children. Only God could accomplish that. Therefore, Rachel used a strategy. Genesis chapter 30, verses 3 through 6, informs us, she said, "Behold my maid Bilhah, go into her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her." She gave him Bilhah her handmaid as wife. Jacob went in to her. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Rachel said, "God has judged me, and has also heard my voice, and has given me a son." Therefore called she his name Dan. Rachel gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob. Any children Bilhah had legally counted as Rachel's. Bilhah had a son named Dan. Genesis chapter 30 verses 7 through 8 continues, "Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again, and bore Jacob a second son. Rachel said, 'With great wrestlings have I wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed.' She called his name Naphtali. Bilhah had another son named Naphtali. Rachel saw this as a competition with Leah. Not to be outdone, Leah gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob. Genesis chapter 30, verses 9 through 13, informs us, when Leah saw that she had left bearing, she took Zilpah her maid and gave her to Jacob as wife. Zilpah, Leah's maid, bore Jacob a son. Leah said, "A troop comes." She called his name Gad. Zilpah, Leah's maid, bore Jacob a second son. Leah said, "Happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed." She called his name Asher. Zilpah had 2 sons, Gad and Asher. Later, Leah had 2 more sons and a daughter. Genesis chapter 30, verses 17 through 21, records, God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob the 5th son. Leah said, "God has given me my hire, because I have given my maiden to my husband." She called his name Issachar. Leah conceived again, and bore Jacob the 6th son. Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good dowry. Now will my husband dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons. She called his name Zebulun. Afterwards she bore a daughter, and called her name Dinah. She named them Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. Finally, God remembered Rachel. Genesis chapter 30, verses 22 through 24, records this blessed moment. God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son, and said, "God has taken away my reproach." She called his name Joseph, and said, "The Lord shall add to me another son." Rachel finally had her own son. She named him Joseph. The shame of barrenness was removed from her. These children would become the foundation of the 12 tribes of Israel. After Joseph was born, Jacob desired to leave. Genesis chapter 30, verses 25 through 26, shows his request. It came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away, that I may go to my own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you." Jacob had fulfilled his 14 years of service. He desired to take his family and return home. However, Laban did not desire Jacob to leave. Genesis chapter 30, verses 27 through 28, reveals why. Laban said to him, "I request of you, if I have found favor in your eyes, stay, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." And he said, "Appoint me your wages, and I will give it." Laban admitted that God had blessed him on account of Jacob. He asked Jacob to name his wages and stay longer. Jacob agreed, however, with specific terms. Genesis chapter 30, verses 31 through 32, records the deal. He said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flock. All the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and of such shall be my hire." Jacob would take only the speckled, spotted, and dark-colored animals as wages. Laban agreed, thinking this would give Jacob very few animals, since most sheep were white and most goats were dark. However, Jacob was clever. Genesis chapter 30, verses 37 through 39, describes his method. Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar and of the hazel and chestnut tree, and peeled white streaks in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. He set the rods, which he had peeled before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. The flocks conceived before the rods, and brought forth cattle that were ring-streaked, speckled, and spotted. Jacob used selective breeding techniques. He placed striped branches at the watering places where the stronger animals would mate. The animals produced speckled and spotted offspring that belonged to Jacob. Genesis chapter 30, verse 43, shows the result. The man increased exceedingly, and had much cattle and maidservants and menservants and camels and donkeys. Jacob became very wealthy. God blessed him abundantly, and he built up large flocks, despite Laban's attempts to manipulate him. The deceiver had learned to navigate deception, and God prospered him in the process. Jacob had been with Laban for 20 years at this point. He had become wealthy. However, he also noticed that Laban and his sons were growing hostile toward him. Genesis chapter 31 verse 2 shows us the tension. He heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, "Jacob has taken away all that was our father's. Of that which was our father's has he gotten all this glory." Jacob observed the countenance of Laban. Behold, it was not toward him as before. Laban's sons were complaining. They believed Jacob had taken what rightfully belonged to their father. They saw Jacob's wealth and felt cheated. When Jacob looked at Laban's face, he could see the relationship had changed. Laban no longer looked at him with favor. The atmosphere had become dangerous. Then God intervened. Genesis chapter 31, verse 3, records the divine command. The Lord said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you." God told Jacob it was time to go home, return to the land of his fathers, to his own people. God promised to be with him. This was the moment Jacob had been waiting for. God was fulfilling the promise he had made at Bethel 20 years earlier to bring Jacob back home. Jacob called Rachel and Leah out to the field where his flocks were. He needed to talk to them privately away from Laban's household. Genesis chapter 31, verses 4 through 7, shows what he told them. Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock, and said to them, "I see your father's countenance, that it is not toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that with all my power I have served your father, and your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not permit him to hurt me." Jacob explained everything to his wives. Their father's attitude had changed toward him. However, God had been with Jacob through it all. Jacob had worked hard and faithfully, yet Laban had deceived him and changed his wages 10 times. Despite Laban's tricks, God had protected Jacob and made him prosper. Then Jacob told them about a dream. Genesis chapter 31 verses 10 through 13 records it. "It came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived that I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ring-streaked, speckled, and grizzled. The angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, 'Jacob,' and I said, 'Here I am.' He said, 'Lift up now your eyes, and see all the rams which leap upon the cattle are ring-streaked, speckled, and grizzled, for I have seen all that Laban does to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, and where you vowed a vow to me. Now arise, get yourself out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred.' In the dream, God's angel showed Jacob that God himself was behind Jacob's prosperity. God had seen everything Laban had done to Jacob. The angel identified himself as the God of Bethel, the God who had appeared to Jacob 20 years earlier. At this moment, God was telling Jacob to leave and return home. Rachel and Leah responded without hesitation. Genesis chapter 31, verses 14 through 16, shows their agreement. Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, "Is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not counted by him as strangers? For he has sold us, and has quite devoured also our money, for all the riches which God has taken from our father, that is ours and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God has said to you, do." The sisters were united in their response. They had no inheritance left in their father's house. Laban had treated them like strangers, had sold them to Jacob, and had consumed the bride price. They agreed that the wealth God had given Jacob rightfully belonged to them and their children. Whatever God told Jacob to do, they would support him. Jacob made his decision. He would leave while Laban was away. Genesis chapter 31, verses 17 through 18, informs us, "Then Jacob rose up and set his sons and his wives upon camels. He carried away all his cattle and all his goods which he had gotten. the cattle of his getting, which he had gotten in Padan Aram, to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. Jacob put his wives and children on camels and gathered all his livestock and possessions. He was heading back to Canaan to his father Isaac. This was a massive undertaking, moving an entire household with large flocks. Genesis chapter 31, verses 19 through 20, adds an important detail. Laban went to shear his sheep. Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian, in that he told him not that he fled. Laban was away shearing his sheep when Jacob left. Rachel secretly took her father's household idols. Jacob left without telling Laban. He essentially snuck away. Genesis chapter 31, verse 21, describes the departure. So he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river and set his face toward the Mount Gilead. Jacob crossed the Euphrates River and headed toward the hill country of Gilead. He was making his escape with everything he owned. 3 days later, Laban found out. Genesis chapter 31, verses 22 through 23, shows his response. It was told to Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob was fled. He took his brothers with him and pursued after him 7 days' journey, and they overtook him in the Mount of Gilead. Laban gathered his relatives and chased after Jacob. They traveled hard for 7 days and finally caught up with Jacob in the mountains of Gilead. This was a dangerous situation. Laban had armed men with him, and Jacob's family was vulnerable. However, God intervened again. Genesis chapter 31, verse 24, informs us, God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, "Take heed that you speak not to Jacob either good or bad." The night before Laban reached Jacob, God appeared to Laban in a dream. God warned him not to say anything to Jacob, neither good nor bad. This was God's protection over Jacob. Laban was not to threaten him or try to persuade him to return. The next day, Laban confronted Jacob. Genesis chapter 31, verses 25 through 28, records the conversation. Then Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount, and Laban with his brothers pitched in the mount of Gilead. Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done, that you have stolen away unawares to me, and carried away my daughters as captives taken with the sword? Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me? Did you not tell me that I might have sent you away with mirth and with songs, with tabret and with harp, and have not permitted me to kiss my sons and my daughters? You have now done foolishly in so doing." Laban acted hurt and offended. He accused Jacob of sneaking away and treating his daughters like war captives. He claimed he would have thrown a farewell party with music and celebration if Jacob had only told him. He said Jacob had foolishly prevented him from kissing his grandchildren goodbye. Then Laban revealed what he really desired to do. Genesis chapter 31, verse 29, shows his threat. "It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Take heed that you speak not to Jacob either good or bad.'" Laban admitted he had the power to harm Jacob. He had enough men to hurt Jacob's family, but God had stopped him. Laban could not touch Jacob because God had warned him in the dream. Still, Laban had one more accusation. Genesis chapter 31, verse 30 continues, "Now, though you would needs be gone, because you so longed after your father's house, yet why have you stolen my gods?" Laban demanded to know why Jacob had stolen his household gods. He did not know that Rachel, not Jacob, had taken them. Jacob defended himself strongly. Genesis chapter 31, verses 36 through 37, shows his response. Jacob was angry and argued with Laban. Jacob answered and said to Laban, "What is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued after me? Whereas you have searched all my stuff, what have you found of all your household stuff? Set it here before my brothers and your brothers, that they may judge between us both." Jacob got angry. He challenged Laban to show what he had found. Laban had searched through everything Jacob owned, but found nothing. Jacob was innocent of stealing Laban's gods. Jacob continued his defense, reminding Laban of all he had done. Genesis chapter 31, verses 38 through 41, records his powerful words. "These 20 years have I been with you. Your ewes and your she-goats have not cast their young, and the rams of your flock have I not eaten. That which was torn of beasts I brought not to you. I bore the loss of it. Of my hand did you require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was in the day, the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus have I been 20 years in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your cattle, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Jacob laid out everything. For 20 years he had served Laban faithfully. The flocks had thrived under his care. When animals were killed by wild beasts, Jacob took the loss himself, rather than charging Laban. He worked in scorching heat during the day and freezing cold at night, losing sleep to protect Laban's property. 14 years he worked for Rachel and Leah. 6 more years for the livestock. Through it all, Laban had changed his wages 10 times, always trying to cheat him. Then Jacob made his final point. Genesis chapter 31, verse 42 declares, "Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely you would have sent me away now empty. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night." Jacob credited God for everything. If God had not been with him, Laban would have sent him away with nothing. However, God had seen Jacob's hard work and suffering. God had rebuked Laban in the dream the night before. Laban had no good response. Genesis chapter 31 verse 43 shows his weak reply. Laban answered and said to Jacob, "These daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and these cattle are my cattle, and all that you see is mine. What can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children which they have borne?" Laban tried to claim everything, the daughters, the grandchildren, the livestock, but he knew he could not do anything about it now. God had tied his hands. Therefore Laban suggested making a covenant. Genesis chapter 31, verse 44 states, "Now therefore, come, let us make a covenant, I and you, and let it be for a witness between me and you." They needed a formal agreement to prevent future conflict. Genesis chapter 31, verses 45 through 46, describes what they did. Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Jacob said to his brothers, "Gather stones." They took stones and made a heap, and they did eat there upon the heap. Jacob set up a stone pillar as a monument. Then they gathered more stones into a heap and shared a meal together on top of it. This was a covenant ceremony. They gave the place a name. Genesis chapter 31, verses 47 through 48, informs us Laban called it Jegar-Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead, and Laban said, "This heap is a witness between me and you this day." Therefore was the name of it called Gilead. Both names meant the same thing in different languages, heap of witness. This pile of stones would serve as a witness to their agreement. Genesis chapter 31, verses 49 through 50, records Laban's oath. "And Mizpah, for he said, The Lord watch between me and you when we are absent one from another. If you shall afflict my daughters, or if you shall take other wives beside my daughters, no man is with us. See, God is witness between me and you." Laban called on God to watch between them when they were apart. He warned Jacob not to mistreat his daughters or take other wives. God would be their witness. This sounds spiritual in nature, but it was really a threat. Laban was saying, "God is watching you, Jacob." Genesis chapter 31, verses 51 through 52 continues. Laban said to Jacob, "Behold this heap, and behold this pillar which I have cast between me and you. This heap be witness, and this pillar be witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and that you shall not pass over this heap and this pillar to me for harm." The stones marked a boundary. Laban promised not to cross this line to harm Jacob. Jacob promised not to cross it to harm Laban. It was a non-aggression pact. The next morning, they parted ways. Genesis chapter 31, verse 55, informs us, early in the morning, Laban rose up and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them. Laban departed and returned to his place. Laban kissed his grandchildren and daughters goodbye, blessed them, and went back home. Jacob was finally free from Laban's control. Jacob continued his journey toward home. Genesis chapter 32, verses 1 through 2, describes what happened next. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's host." He called the name of that place Mahanaim. Angels met Jacob on his journey. When he saw them, he recognized them as God's army. He named the place Mahanaim, which means two camps, his own camp and God's camp. This was encouraging. God was with him. However, now Jacob faced his biggest fear, Esau. He sent messengers ahead to his brother. Genesis chapter 32, verses 3 through 5, shows his message. Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother, to the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He commanded them, saying, "Thus shall you speak to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says thus, I have sojourned with Laban, and stayed there until now, and I have oxen and donkeys, flocks and men, servants and women servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find grace in your sight." Jacob's message was humble and respectful. He called Esau my lord, and referred to himself as your servant. He explained where he had been, and that he now had wealth. He hoped to find favor in Esau's eyes. Jacob was trying to approach peacefully. The messengers returned with terrifying news. Genesis chapter 32, verse 6, informs us, the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and also he comes to meet you, and 400 men with him." Esau was coming, and he had 400 men with him. This was not a peaceful family reunion. 400 men meant an army. Jacob immediately thought the worst. Esau was coming to kill him and his entire family. Genesis chapter 32, verse 7, shows Jacob's reaction. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that was with him, and the flocks and herds and the camels, into two bands. Jacob was terrified. He split his entire company into two groups. Genesis chapter 32, verse 8, explains his strategy. He said, "If Esau comes to the one company and strikes it, then the other company which is left shall escape. If Esau attacked one group, at least the other group might survive." Jacob was preparing for the worst. Then Jacob did something he had not done in a long time. He prayed. Genesis chapter 32, verses 9 through 12, records this desperate prayer. Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, 'Return to your country and to your kindred, and I will deal well with you.' I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown to your servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I have become two bands. Deliver me, I request of you, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him, lest he will come and strike me, and the mother with the children. You said, 'I will surely do you good, and make your seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude.'" This prayer reveals Jacob's heart. He called on the God of his fathers. He reminded God that it was God who told him to return home. He acknowledged he was not worthy of God's mercy and faithfulness. He remembered crossing the Jordan River 20 years ago with only his staff, and now he had become two large groups. He begged God to deliver him from Esau. He was afraid Esau would kill everyone, the mothers and children included. He reminded God of his promises to do Jacob good and make his descendants as numerous as the sand of the sea. This was Jacob at his most vulnerable, crying out to God for help. After praying, Jacob took action. He decided to send a massive gift to Esau. Genesis chapter 32, verses 13 through 15, lists what he prepared. He lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother. 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 she-donkeys and 10 foals. This was an enormous gift. 550 animals in total. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. This represented a significant portion of Jacob's wealth. Jacob divided these animals into separate groups and gave specific instructions. Genesis chapter 32, verses 16 through 17, informs us. He delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by themselves, and said to his servants, "Pass over before me, and put a space between drove and drove." He commanded the foremost, saying, "When Esau my brother meets you, and asks you, saying, 'Whose are you, and where are you going, and whose are these before you?' Each group of animals was sent separately, with space between them. Jacob told the first servant what to say when Esau met him. Genesis chapter 32, verses 18 through 19, records the instructions. "Then you shall say, 'They are your servant Jacob's. It is a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold also, he is behind us.' So he commanded the second and the third, and all that followed the drove, saying, 'In this manner shall you speak to Esau when you find him.' Every servant was to give the same message. 'These animals are a gift from your servant Jacob to my lord Esau, and Jacob is coming behind us.'" Genesis chapter 32, verse 20, reveals Jacob's strategy. "Say you moreover, behold, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me." Jacob hoped to appease Esau's anger with these gifts. Wave after wave of animals would reach Esau before Jacob arrived. Maybe by the time they met face to face, Esau would be willing to accept Jacob. Genesis chapter 32, verse 21, concludes, "So the present went over before him, and himself lodged that night in the company. The gifts went ahead. Jacob stayed behind with his family for one more night. That night, Jacob made another strategic move. Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 23, informs us. He rose up that night, and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons, and passed over the ford Jabbok. He took them and sent them over the brook, and sent over all that he had. In the middle of the night, Jacob got up and took his entire family, his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and helped them cross the Jabbok River. He also sent all his possessions across. Everyone and everything crossed to the other side. However, Jacob did not cross with them. Genesis chapter 32, verse 24, states, Jacob was left alone. Jacob stayed behind on the other side of the river. He was completely alone. Why did he do this? Perhaps he needed time to think. Perhaps he desired to pray more. Perhaps he was still afraid of what would happen when he met Esau and desired his family safely across the river. Whatever his reason, Jacob found himself isolated in the darkness. Then something happened that would change Jacob forever. In the darkness, someone attacked Jacob. Genesis chapter 32, verse 24, continues, "There wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day." A man appeared and began wrestling with Jacob. This was not a friendly match. This was a real fight, a struggle that lasted all night long. Who was this man? The scripture does not immediately tell us, but we will discover his identity soon. Jacob fought with everything he had. Hour after hour in the darkness, the 2 figures grappled with each other. Neither would give up. Neither would surrender. As dawn began to break, something changed. Genesis chapter 32, verse 25, informs us, "When the man saw that he prevailed not against Jacob, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, as he wrestled with him. The mysterious man saw that he could not overpower Jacob. Therefore he touched Jacob's hip socket, and Jacob's hip was wrenched out of joint. With a single touch, the man dislocated Jacob's hip. This revealed that this was no ordinary man. This was a divine being with supernatural power. However, even with a dislocated hip, Jacob refused to let go. Genesis chapter 32, verse 26, shows what happened next. The man said, "Let me go, for the day breaks." Jacob said, "I will not let you go, except you bless me." The man asked Jacob to release him because dawn was breaking. However, Jacob held on tight. Despite his pain, despite his injury, Jacob made a demand. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Jacob realized he was wrestling with a divine being, and he desperately desired a blessing. Then the man asked Jacob a question. Genesis chapter 32, verse 27 records it. He said to him, "What is your name?" Jacob said, "Jacob." The man asked Jacob for his name. Jacob answered, "Jacob." This was significant. Jacob's name meant deceiver, or one who supplants. Every time someone spoke his name, they remembered what he had done, how he had deceived his father and stolen his brother's blessing. His name carried shame and guilt. However, now everything was about to change. Genesis chapter 32, verse 28, contains one of the most important verses in Jacob's story. The man said, "Your name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince have you power with God and with men, and have prevailed." The man gave Jacob a new name, Israel. This name means he struggles with God, or God strives. The man explained why Jacob had struggled with God and with men, and he had prevailed. Jacob had wrestled with God himself and had not given up. This new name represented a new identity. Jacob was no longer just the deceiver, he was now Israel, the one who had contended with God and lived. Now it was Jacob's turn to ask. Genesis chapter 32, verse 29, informs us. Jacob asked him and said, "Tell me, I request of you, your name." The man said, "Why is it that you ask after my name?" And he blessed him there. Jacob asked the man for his name, but the man did not give it directly. Instead, he responded with a question and then blessed Jacob right there. The blessing Jacob had begged for was given. Jacob now understood who he had been wrestling with. Genesis chapter 32, verse 30, reveals his realization. Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God. He had seen God face to face and survived. In that culture, people believed that seeing God would result in death. However, Jacob had wrestled with God through the night and lived to tell about it. Genesis chapter 32, verse 31, describes the aftermath. As he passed over Penuel, the sun rose upon him, and he limped upon his thigh. As Jacob crossed over Penuel, the sun came up. He was limping because of his hip. The wrestling match had left him with a permanent physical reminder. For the rest of his life, Jacob would walk with a limp. Every step would remind him of the night he wrestled with God. Genesis chapter 32, verse 32, adds a final note. Therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh to this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that shrank. From that day forward the Israelites would not eat the tendon attached to the hip socket, commemorating what happened to Jacob that night. Jacob emerged from that encounter transformed. He had gone into the night as Jacob, the deceiver, the manipulator, the man running from his past. He came out as Israel, the one who had struggled with God. He had received a new name and a new identity. The blessing he had stolen from his father years ago had now been confirmed by God himself through this wrestling match. Jacob still had to face Esau. However, he would face his brother as a different man, not as Jacob, but as Israel. The man who had spent his whole life running and scheming had finally been broken and remade by God. His limp was proof that true transformation requires struggle, and sometimes the breakthrough we need only comes when we refuse to let go of God, even in the darkest night, even when we are injured and exhausted, until He blesses us. If this story has inspired you, challenged you, or helped you see the faithfulness of God in a new way, please subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to bringing you more biblical stories that reveal the character of God and His incredible plans for humanity. Hit that notification bell so you will not miss our next video. Do not keep this story to yourself. Share this video with your friends, family, and anyone who needs to hear about the God who transforms deceivers into princes, who turns our darkest nights into encounters with the divine, and who never gives up on us, no matter how far we have run. Your share might be exactly what someone needs to hear today. Thank you for watching, and may you, like Jacob, refuse to let go of God until He blesses you.